What's up? We are back on the CEO Pulse podcast where you get the real, the raw, and the mind of entrepreneurship. We are sitting down with none other than Chris Widener. All right. So he's the author of 22 books that have been translated all over the world. He's in the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame and has been named one of the top 50 speakers in the world. I mean, the background, we were just talking about this right before we clicked record. His background it's nothing short of of impressive. So I'm very, very honored to have you here on the show today, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I mean, and we were talking right now. I'm a huge motivational learner. All right. So I personal growth and that kind of stuff. I've been just really neck deep into that kind of stuff for the last maybe 15 years. And you've had the experience and to very high levels with some of the people that most people look up to. So give us a little bit of background on you and let's just, dive head first into it.
Yeah, sure. Well, right out of college, I started speaking full time. Because I had a crazy upbringing. My upbringing was crazy. My dad died at 4, lived in 28 homes, went to 11 different schools, started drugs in the 5th, 6th grade, a lot of trouble, getting kicked out of classes and, trouble with the teachers all the time. Zig Ziglar, he always used to say that he graduated in the half of the class that made the top half possible. Well, I graduated in the 1/10 of the class that made the top 90% possible. So I was 149th out of 172 students in my class. But I got myself barely into college, graduated, started speaking. And then I've had just some great fortunate opportunities. I got to work with John Maxwell for a couple of years in the early 2000s. I wrote with him, wrote his nationally syndicated column. I ended up working with Jim Rohn for the last 7 years of his life, which was pretty amazing. Co-wrote his last book called The 12 Pillars. And then I had a television show with Zig Ziglar for 2 years, back in 06, 07, something like that, called True Performance. You can still find that on YouTube. So it's been a great ride. I've had great opportunities. I've been able to travel all over the world speaking, a lot of it around my book called The Art of Influence, which teaches people how to persuade other people and influence other people. But yeah, I've had a great opportunity to work with tons and tons of the legends. Anthony Robbins and I spoke at Jim's funeral memorial service. I've spoken on the same stage as presidential candidates and political figures, sports stars, all of the who's who of the motivational world, the Brian Tracy's, Dennis Waitley's of the world, and all of that. So it's been a fun ride, been an enjoyable life.
Wow. I mean, there's a lot going on right there. It's my big question. One thing that just kind of pops up is how do you go from this stage or this beginning with a lot of struggle and a lot of adversity, I mean, going against you. I mean, you're saying that you were 149 on a class of 172. So the regular thing, right? The natural thought process is, okay, there's no effort, there's no tenacity, there's nothing, they're just not trying, for somebody who's looking at that picture. But you took that and then you ended up being, one of the top 50 speakers in the world and went as far as being a member of the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame. And then you're doing all this work and all this impact throughout the world with the Tony Robbins and some of the biggest people who have had massive ripple effects out there. How do you get from the struggle to that place where you're at now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think anybody should ever look at grades. And I'll tell you a funny story why, and it's true. I was at a conference. I'd been speaking at a conference. It was in Houston. I remember there's about 1,000 people in attendance, and I knew some of the attendees there. And I came walking in toward the back of the room during another session. And there was a woman sitting in the very last row, and she was an affluent, very successful business owner. And I've known her for years. And I walked up to her and I said, the A students all sit in front. And she said, well, you know that the A students usually end up working for us C students. And I thought it was such a great comment, because it's really true. A lot of very successful people were not that good in school. I was very smart. I tested very, very well, those kinds of things, but I was bored with school. School is not a challenge for me. So I think sometimes when we look at how school rates children, I don't necessarily know that it has a good understanding of who's going to make a good entrepreneur, who's going to be able to go out and actually make a difference.
Right.
To do very well in school requires a certain skill set. That skill set is not always the same skill set that's required to be a successful entrepreneur or startup person. So, but how did I get there? I think everybody gets there the same way. You decide to get there. You get tired of where you're at. You get tired of the direction you're going in. You decide what kind of life you want. You figure out how to get it. And then you just have a decision of whether or not you're going to go do it or not. So, I had hopes and dreams for my life, and I wanted good things to happen for my life, even when I wasn't experiencing it. And I was addicted to drugs and alcohol and all that as a teenager. But I knew that I wanted to grow up and be successful and have money and have to whatever degree you're thinking about this in high school, have a family and children. And, I didn't want bad things for my life, but I quickly realized that that's the direction I was headed. And so my life turned around the summer before my senior year of high school. I ended up going to a youth group where the youth minister kind of took me under his wing, taught me a lot about God and my purpose here on earth, as well as I didn't have a lot of male role models. So he became a good male role model to me. He was a good old boy from Helena, Montana. So he didn't take any BS off anybody, which I used to dole out a lot of BS. So he was a perfect match for me. But then you just have to set your chart, you set your agenda, you develop your strategy, and then it's just execution. Success is really just about execution. It's not just about having a vision of where you want to go, which is important, but there's lots of people who can come up with a great idea of where they want to go. There's even people that can develop a plan to get there, but it's the execution of the plan that determines whether or not people end up getting to where they want to get.
I 100% agree. You can have a beautifully crafted vision, right? And then maybe a nice purpose that gives you direction, printed on the wall and whatnot. But at the end of the day, if you're not getting your hands dirty with the actions that it takes to get things done every single day, there's not going to be any progress. There's not going to be any progress, and just stay stagnant, stay on the same place.
You have to have both. You have to have a powerful vision, not downplaying powerful vision. One of the quotes that people quote me on a lot and tweet it out and such is something I said a long time ago, that vision is the spectacular that motivates you to do the mundane. Vision is that big spectacular thing, a big company or a big beautiful new home or a sports car that you want or whatever that big vision is that you want. But it's the mundane things, it's the boring day-to-day things that's going to determine whether or not you build that big company. Or you look at some of the biggest companies in the world, Apple with, Steve Jobs creating it, Microsoft with Bill Gates, just for two examples. Those guys worked harder than anybody. Like most people would never have been able to build a big company like that because nobody is willing to put in that much work. You will rarely find a giant corporation that was built by a guy in his part-time. It requires a lot of discipline, tenacity, and just frankly, out and out long hours of work. And most people aren't willing to do it.
Yeah, it's really, paying the price, right, for what you want to get to, or that, that place, that aspiration. But this is kind of how I break it down, right? We have the vision really kind of creates, in my head, makes sense, right? But it creates the direction, the map. And then you have, the purpose. That's kind of like the fuel. It's the thing that lights the vehicle. And then, your actual vehicle, it's going to be those actions that, that take you from point A to point B. But at the end of the day, it's a conjunction of everything that gets you to your destination. You can't have, either of them without, the other. So yeah, I think it's very interesting. At the end of the day, we hear similar stuff from the people who are actually doing it. It's action. It's, you go out there and then you perform, you execute. There's nothing, there's no magic pill that you can take and then wake up the next day wealthy and then 10 times better than the day you were before. It just doesn't happen. You have to progressively get there and put in the effort. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And right now your main role, so you are a speaker, right? And your main role is you're helping leaders help gain trust, respect, and admiration from the people who are they're trying to lead, right?
Yep.
And getting crafting, or I guess clarifying the messages that are getting out there. And you're doing it, from what I understand, you do it from a space of almost like a servant leadership, kind of standpoint, right?
Yeah,
Tell me.
absolutely. I believe that leaders are servants. And it doesn't mean that they don't take their own considerations into mind, but it just places the groups, it places the group's benefits at higher level than the personal benefits. So it means that you're always putting the group and their needs ahead of your own needs. And when you act out as a servant leader, you develop loyalty, and people will stick with you through thick and thin. If they know that you're not just using them for your own personal gain, the people will stick with you forever. And so it always comes from that perspective. How can I help you? And the reality is if, it's Zig Ziglar's old quote. He always says, you can have anything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want out of life. And so as a leader, if we can help our employees or the people who follow us to gain what they want out of life, they're going to be happier with us. They're going to work harder for us. They're going to be more efficient for us. They're going to sell more for us. They're going to be devoted to us when times get hard. So it's very, very important for us to understand that we are servant leaders, because if you're a tyrant, people will put up with it while things are going well, while the money's flowing and everybody's happy. But as soon as there's hard times, out the door they go. Nobody sticks around with a tyrant.
Yeah, it really diminishes the sense of loyalty, right? People, I think now we're at a stage where people are waking up, people are paying more attention to the beingness instead of the doingness of things. Exactly. And I think that's huge. It's huge. So if you create an environment that people can belong, in, and they have a vested interest and a sense of meaning, a sense of impact. I mean, and you bring them into your overall picture. At the end of the day, we're vehicles, right? As entrepreneurs, we're vehicles for the people who are working alongside of us. And if we can create something that's meaningful and it's really create an impact and bring them all in, now they're vested in it. So it's not necessarily a strategy for cohesion or team bonding, I think, but it's the right thing to do, and it just so happens to work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because people know when you're taking advantage of them or you're taking care of them. Yeah. And, you see some of these great leaders who take cuts in pay when times get tough. They're not going to keep stash in their pockets. You probably, as young as you are, you probably only remember it by hearing about it. But Chrysler was one of the great big companies in America, and they suffered a lot of troubles when I was a young man. And a guy named Lee Iacocca came in. And he was going to do the takeover. He was going to, return them to all their glory. And one of the first things he did was he said, I'm going to take $1 a year in salary. Now, in the grand scheme of things, is it that big of a deal? No. He already had tens of millions of dollars in the bank. He had, all these things. He also had a very big stock compensation package, but it only delivered if he actually turned the company around. So he wasn't really going to do this for free, right? But it was symbolic. It was symbolic because, he could have probably back then, he probably could have paid himself a couple $1 million a year. Well, you could have hired line workers at Chrysler for $15,000 a year. So, at $1.5 million a year in salary, that's 100 line workers you could hire. And that spoke volumes to the workers at Chrysler, who appreciated not just, it was sort of symbolic, but it actually had real world consequences. And they turned it around and he made a fortune. So
yeah, it's crazy how it works. But yeah, if you help enough people get what they want, you're going to get what you want. I like to see it in my companies. I like to see myself as a byproduct of what's going on. My success is a byproduct of my team's success. Yeah. And I think it sets you up as a leader. I think it sets you up in a different perspective. Right now, we have a different take. For example, for me to make a certain amount of money, I know that my director of operations has to make a certain amount of money. So if I focus on his goal, my goal is going to be met. Why? Because I'm a byproduct. And it's not that I'm paying any less attention or that I care less about my own personal well-being. I don't, right? But it's a different emphasis and focus. And when I think when I highlight, the needs of the people around me, everything else gets taken care of.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you've heard of vision boards, and people put these vision boards up on their wall. It's big,
100%, yeah.
big paper, and they put the picture of the house they want, and the car they want, the boat they want. And about 2 years ago, I developed a new theory about vision boards, and this is what I go around teaching now. Yes, you should do your own vision board.
People take notes.
But here's what you need to do. You need to go and ask your top 3 to 5 people, the people who have the most potential growth in your company or business, and ask them to create a vision board for you. But it's their vision board, but you're going to hang it on your wall. So you get Tom, Joe, Sam, Susie, and Martha, and they all create a little vision board for you, and you put it up there. Now, if you get Tom, Joe, Susie, Sam, and Martha to get what they want, what's going to happen to you? You're going to get what you want. If you can help them get what they want, that rising tide lifts all boats. You're going to do much, much better yourself.
Yeah. I love that. I do something similar. I call it the top 3s, just because I don't have a better name for it, but it's top 3 personal priorities. So I have a management team, right? And we sit down and we go through, the business every single week, tracking KPIs, doing the regular business thing. About a third of that meeting is really focused at an individual level. And I have them just call out top 3 priorities. This is personal priorities. They have nothing to do with business. What are your top 3 priorities? For example, one of them, one of the team members, she wanted to buy a house. Like, that was one of her top 3s. Another one was replaces engineering income with what we were doing now, because he was doing 2 things. That's a top 3 for him. So I started creating the top 3 mentalities. And what happens is, after 3-6 months or a period, they start to get boring. But at one point, there were these big challenges, right? So when they were thinking top 3s, there were challenges, and then they got boring after time because they're crushing them. They started to do better and then overcome them. And now it's like, oh, I got to talk about top 3s again. So when we get to that space, it's another, a click of awareness, right? Like, wow, this used to be a challenge and now it's not. But it's very, it's beautiful to see, like, the development, right? From adversity and struggle to, oh, okay, cool. And now it's something that I just know I handle. It's top of head. So now it's even to the point that it's boring to even talk about it, but it's something that was a big deal 6 months ago before I conquered it. Yeah. So I love it. I think I'm gonna take that, the vision board, and then do a little twist to the top 3s, because it makes perfect sense. Thank you for that. So you started. Give me some pragmatic insight as to how you became the person that you are now. So did you jump into sales early on after high school? Did you start what was the transition like?
Well, I got a funny story about growing up in sales, but I can tell you that a little bit later. I'll answer this specific question. I started speaking right out of high school, or not high school, out of college. And so I was doing 2 things at the same time. I was a pastor and I was a speaker. And in the church world, there's a thing called a church planter. Now, a church planter is when your denomination sends you to a town where they don't have a church, and you go start one. So even as a pastor, I was an entrepreneur. I moved to a town called Issaquah, Washington. And Issaquah is a little bedroom community of Seattle. It's actually the international headquarters of Costco, and started a church there. And then from there, we started one in Bellevue. We started one in, so now we were franchising, right? If you want to use the lingo, we were franchising, right? And so I would bring a pastor in and train them and, work with them, and then we'd start another one. So I was doing that, but I was also speaking. And so I was out and about, and, on Sunday mornings I'd be preaching, and on Wednesday afternoons I'd be speaking at Microsoft, Cisco Systems, Harvard Business School, General Electric, whatever, on leadership. Wow. And so in 2002 is when I started writing and speaking full time. So from 88 to 2002, I sort of had a dual track of being a pastor, but also being a speaker. I'd started writing some of my books then. And I connected with a guy who had also been a pastor, who left being a pastor to become a writer and a speaker and became truly the biggest leadership speaker of our times, John Maxwell. So I actually took a graduate class in ministry from John Maxwell before anybody really even heard of him. People in the church world had heard of John, but nobody else really had. And
wow, amazing.
And so I ended up writing with him 2001, 2002. And then that worked into working with Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar and the like. But, so I was always entrepreneurial. It's kind of the difference between, starting a sandwich shop, your own sandwich shop, or going to become the president of Subway sandwiches. It's right. two different things you're doing there. Most pastors, they go to a church where there's already 500 people there and they get a salary and whatever. I had no salary when we first started. I had to go find people. I had to sell, and so a lot of the similarities in regard to the tactics that you use in terms of growing a business or growing an organization.
I think the key word there is organization, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we have a structure in both places. So we have a structure, in business, but you take that and then you whether it's a nonprofit, if it's a church, there's got to be a structure behind it, a systematic, approach to doing things, somehow, some way. It doesn't matter how connected or how big on the human side it is. There's still got to be something on the pragmatic side where things get connected. There's accountability.
Well, yeah, and that's going to determine how big those organizations get. So right. You might have a really great product, but if you don't know how to execute and develop strategy and sales and marketing and stuff like that, it's never going to go anywhere. You might have, you could take a nonprofit organization. There's thousands and thousands of them that do good things, but nobody's ever heard of them. And then you have some that are these giant entities, American Red Cross, or, American Cancer Society, or, Wounded Warriors Foundation, or any of those. Same thing with churches. The average church size in America is 150 people. But then you have these churches that grow to 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 30,000 people. It's not because the message is any better. It's not because the pews are any softer. It's not because the baptism water is any warmer. It's because they know how to organize, and they know how to build buildings, and they know how to, move people in and out on Sunday mornings. So much of this, the entrepreneurial journey, it doesn't matter what world you're in. It's the same universal principles that grow an organization or keep an organization small. In fact, when I was in the church world, it's funny, you probably never thought you'd end up talking about this, but there's some actually really interesting overlaps. When I was studying ministry, there was this series of books. Church growth was a big area of study when I was going in the ministry. And it was the study of how churches grow. And there were books. One was called Breaking the 100 Barrier. One was called Breaking the 800 Barrier. And I think the next one, I can't remember. But what they found was there were natural barriers that popped up at certain populations of your church size, right? Well, I would say that the same thing happens in the business world. There are certain natural barriers. You're going to grow, and now all of a sudden you have these decisions. Cash flow, do we go into debt? To improve our growth? Like, you have all these decisions to make, and those decisions you make are going to determine whether you stay a small business or you grow to become a bigger business.
Right.
And so all of those kinds of universal principles, they work whether you're building a church or you're building a technology company, or you're building a nonprofit to help people find water in Africa. It really is a lot of the same principles of entrepreneurism.
You know what? It's interesting that you mentioned that. I've been working for the last about a month and a half, 2 months on stages of business. I focus my businesses are in real estate, most of them. Then I have my organizational psychology practice, and I do coaching consulting there. But I've been just putting some a model together, right? And I'm talking about the stages of business. In between stages of business, what I'm finding, especially looking at clients' business, looking at my own stuff, and then going back and doing research and putting it all together, is that you have stages, that you have certain priorities and certain challenges, right, at different stages, and then you get something that switches the gears in your business, and now you have to transition to that next stage. But in between, there's a period of chaos. There's a big period
or you have to choose not to transition to that stage. You have
Right.
the choice. Am I going to make this bigger, or am I going to stay right where I'm at? So
Exactly.
if you think about it, think about a guy decides to open a sandwich shop. Now, he's going to open from 9 until 5, and he's going to have 2 employees. Well, he makes really good sandwiches. So now it's packed out. He needs to hire more employees. Now he has, 8 employees at 8 registers. But at some point, because he's limited by time and space, he will max out his capacity at that one store. So
Right.
he's really great sandwiches, and people are pouring through the stores. Now he's open 24/7. He has 12 employees, and he has literally 40 people in the lobby of his restaurant at any given moment. Well, he can't get any bigger,
Right.
or he can either decide to stay there and enjoy that great business, or open another location. And that's the decision. And there are people who will own one hamburger store. There are still people that own one hamburger store. I have some friends up in the Seattle area, the Spady family. They own 6 or 7 hamburgers. They're iconic in Seattle. They're called Dick's Drive-In. Their grandpa's name was Dick. So Dick's Drive-Ins, they own 6 or 7. And I always think it's the best burger. Like, I love Dick's Drive-In. It's the best burgers and fries, whatever. And I'm always like, why don't you guys, have 50, 100, 1,200, whatever?
Blow this out of the water.
Yeah, not what they want, right? And then
Yeah.
you have McDonald's, who has, whatever, 28,000 stores all over the world. So it's really a personal choice for people. And I don't think there's a right and a wrong. I think there's only a what's best for you and what do you want to do with your life.
100%. It comes back to that vision, right? What kind of headaches do you want? What kind of battles do you want to be fighting? Does it really make sense? Is I don't know, earning another $200,000 a year, another million a year, is it really going to make a difference in terms of quality? I'm thinking about the Chrysler example that you gave me earlier. It's for him, it was probably not going to mean a lot, right? To make another $2 million. He was already well off. So that one thing, which he did, the $1, just had a very intense ripple effect with everybody else.
Yeah.
But it comes down to picking our own, picking the battles, right? And like, I guess, choosing the lane that we want to operate in.
Yeah. Even in my speaking career, I've done like 70
that.
speeches a year at tops, but I have friends that do 120 speeches a year.
Yeah.
Well, that's 50 more days a year that they're gone from their family.
Yeah.
But really, it's probably more like 75 days that they're gone from their family. And that's 2 months. And so when my kids were growing up, I decided I wasn't going to be that guy that was gone 240 days a year. And so I chose to limit my income. I had friends that made far more money than I did financially in the speaking business, but I was able to be home and enjoy my children and coach little leagues and things like that, whereas they weren't. And I'm not saying I was right and they were wrong. I was just saying that was the choice I made, and it was right for me.
I'm going to go full cliche here, but it's a life by design, right? That's the beautiful opportunity that we get as entrepreneurs. We get to design the type of life that we want to live, the impact that we want to have, and the ripple effects that we can leave behind. I love it.
Yep, absolutely.
I want to pick your brain, and I know your time is super valuable, so I don't want to keep you longer than we have to. But it's I want to pick your brain on leadership.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Do you feel like people are just pre-wired for or predisposed to becoming leaders, or you think that it's something that can be learned?
Yes.
I love it.
Yes, I do.
It's exactly my take.
I mean, I do believe that there are some people that have natural leadership components. They've done studies and they've found that almost everybody elected to be president of the United States has been over 6 foot tall. So taller people have a more commanding presence. I'll give you an example. I always say, if Tony Robbins was 5'2" and had a high squeaky voice, would he still be Tony Robbins?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
He wouldn't be. I guarantee you he wouldn't be, because part of what makes Tony is that he's this commanding, gigantic figure. I remember the first time I ever shook his hand and I felt like I'd stuck my hand in a catcher's mitt, because I played catcher growing up, and it was giant. He's a huge man with this booming presence, this big barrel chested, and every part of him is just big, and it's commanding. And so that's natural. It's a natural presence. And yet there's people that are built like Tony that are smart like Tony, who have not achieved anything near what Tony has achieved. Because I think that there are some things that let's say you're born into a wealthy family and your mom and dad are very successful attorney and a CEO or something like that. And they are able to send you to private high school and then you go to Harvard or Yale or something. That's a great built-in natural sort of thing for you, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to go and do anything worthwhile in the world.
Yeah.
So, and for every one of those folks, I can find somebody who was born into nothing, that had nothing, who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. Chris Gardner from The Pursuit of Happiness, the movie that Will Smith starred as Chris Gardner, true story. He was a homeless man and he saw a guy get out of a Ferrari one day and he said, "Excuse me, sir, can I ask you what you do for a living?" He said, "I'm a stockbroker." And he said, "Great, thank you very much," and went and became a stockbroker. And now I think that Chris has a net worth of up over $100 million. Literally, wow. Decided as a homeless person to ask a guy who got out of a Ferrari what he did for a living, and then went and did it. So I believe that leadership and success, I believe that there are some people get head starts. Mm-hmm. I believe that some people have some built-in wiring that's maybe a little bit better for them. But the difference between the successful and the unsuccessful is not your natural capabilities, but it's what you do with what you have. There are a lot of C students who are getting Bs and a lot of A students are getting Cs. I would rather have a C student who gets a B than an A student who gets a C. You want that hard work, that discipline. And I think the same is true with leadership. You can have some natural tendencies. Maybe you're a good speaker. Maybe you're tall and good looking, and maybe you've got a soft demeanor, whatever it might be. But if you don't understand the skill set that's required to become a great leader, you're going to run into problems.
Yeah, it's so true. So true. No, so what about the skill set? I mean, what are some things that leaders perhaps need to focus on just to kind of fine tune? And I know, one of them is going to be, projecting, right, and having that confidence that that's a given. But what else do you see out there that's a big addition to that whole leaders package?
Well, it's interesting because I do this whole thing in my seminars, the difference between the skills that a leader needs versus the character traits that a leader needs. And by far and away, the number one thing that
you say it's so much better than I do.
Well, no, it's fine. I've been doing it for a long time. The character traits, things like integrity, honesty, forthrightness, kindness, those kinds of things. There are far more character traits that we have to master than there are skills. Mm-hmm. I'd say that there's maybe 5 or 6 skills, but I always tell everybody, just start with one. Mm-hmm. Start with communication. Start with communication. The number one skill set of a leader must always be communication. The ability to take what is inside your head and put it inside first the ears of your followers or employees, and then into the hearts and minds of your followers or employees. And so your ability to take what's inside of you and communicate it accurately, passionately, with integrity. In fact, I wrote an article once called The 3 Legs of Persuasion. It's based on Aristotle's theories on persuasion. There were 3 things: ethos, pathos, and logos. Okay. And ethos is ethics, pathos is passion, and logos is logic. It's where we get the word logic. And so everything must come from a baseline. I like to think of it as a triangle. So the bottom line is ethos, ethics, the foundation of what we are as leaders, and the skill sets that we need. We need to be ethical. We need to operate out of a single set of morals, ethics, and values, not a dual set. We need to maintain that integrity. Secondly, one of the tilting lines then is logos, which is logic. It has to make sense. You have to be able to make logical sense of what it is that you're communicating and trying to pass along to someone else. But the other is it has to be pathos. It has to have passion to it. So, if somebody's trying to cast a vision and they're just, giving you a very logical thing that just sounds like this the whole time, and everybody's going to just get really bored of listening to them because it's just really boring and nobody wants to hear this on and on and on and on and on, right?
You can't convey a vision through a spreadsheet.
With passion, right? But then I call these people the Vision of the Month Club, right? You got these people that are passionate about everything. You know, one month they're passionate about this, and then the next month they're passionate about this, and they can't even describe it to anybody, and nobody figures out what they're doing. So they've got all the passion in the world, but they don't have a logical, structural way of doing it. So communicating in a logical and yet passionate way, I think, is from a foundation of ethics, is the number one skill set of a leader. Vision casting, helping your people know where you're going and why it's important and how to do it. Very, very important. So I always just tell people, once you've mastered communication, then start working on all the others, because communication is clearly, in my opinion, number one.
Well, it does two things, right? You convey the message that you are trying to get across the table, but it also forces you to clarify your own thoughts.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that every time I've sat down to think about what I want to convey, especially if it's a vision for one of the companies, and I have something, a new direction, we're doing a pivot, we're adding a new strategy, whatever, right? I have to format or the clarity on this vision that I have, and then convey that. But every time I do that, I find gaps, and I find deficits and little weaknesses and weak spots in my own narrative. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
Getting ready to communicate something better and getting better at that forces me to have a clearer understanding of even my own stuff. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I mean, so true, so true. Skills versus character. I got confidence, ethical, integral, and passion on some of the character traits, and then communication, logical, and passionate vision casting on the skill sets. Because
I think time management is key to a leader. The ability to manage your time and make sure that you're doing, which is really ultimately, I wrote an article, I even have a CD called The Myth of What We Manage. We really don't manage time. Time is unmanageable. You literally, we could take the next 30 seconds and watch you try to manage time, but that 30 seconds is going to happen whether you want it to or not. Right? Time just keeps on clicking. No matter what's happening, that clock just keeps pounding away second by second. We can't manage that. We can't slow it down. We can't speed it up. The thing that we manage is ourselves while time passes us by. This is why I always say, the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, has 24 hours in one day. The poorest man in the world, laying on a park bench, drunk out of his mind, has 24 hours in a day. The hours are irrelevant. It's what you do in those hours that is relevant. And I remember I had a coaching client once, made a lot of money, and he was with a big company. I don't want to get too detailed, but anyway, he was trying to find out why he was so inefficient. Well, it took me about 12 minutes on the first call to find out he was playing like 4 hours of video games a day. But wait, at work.
No way.
And I'm like, number one,
at that level,
you have a financial responsibility to your employer to give him. So we had an ethical discussion right out of the chute. But then I was just like, dude, the reason you're not accomplishing what you want to accomplish is because you're not doing anything to get there. You're spending your time shooting aliens or something. Like I've never been a big gamer, so I probably have less tolerance for that kind of thing than I should, because I know probably a lot of your fans probably play a lot of games. But 4 hours during the day when you're trying to become wildly successful, that's not the key. That's not the way. That's not the roadmap to get there.
Oh yeah, there's so many distractions too. I mean, when you're trying to get better at anything, right? And you have that leader aspiration. I mean, I'm not even gonna say mentality, but because I think, like for me personally, I transition into that space. I don't think I set off as a leader right out of the gate. I just transitioned more into that leadership role and got, my awareness grew bigger, and I started fine tuning some stuff and got better at it.
Well, you have to grow. You have to grow. Like, for example, I do, having worked with Jim Rohn, he was big in the network marketing industry. So I've done a ton of speeches for network marketing people. They build their sales organizations. And there's one woman who has hired me a bunch of times over the years. And she's probably made $100 million in network marketing over the years. One of the biggest female network marketers of all time. And I remember once at a conference that she was putting on, I started kind of picking on her a little bit, not picking on her, but talking to her, and I said, look at this conference. And there was, a couple thousand people there. I'm like, you put this on. When first signed up to sell skincare and lotions, did you ever in your wildest imaginations think you'd make this much money, have this many people on your team, or put on a conference like this? And she said, never. In fact, if you'd have told me I was going to do it, I'd have told you you're crazy. Like, she couldn't even imagine getting up in front of 3 or 4 people. But now she's standing on stages at their national conventions with, 30,000 people in the audience, and has built a team of hundreds of thousands of people. So she had to grow into that. She could have chosen to not grow into that. And frankly, there's a lot of people who choose not to grow into their greatness. And the reason they choose to, and we never hear about them because, because they don't grow into greatness. The ones we hear about are the people who choose to grow into greatness. I'll tell you a story, speaking of mindset. I teased it a little bit early. My first sale I ever made, my mom was working at Group Health Hospital in Seattle, Washington. And there was a guy who worked there, and he worked in filing. All he did all day long was took medical files, walked into a room and filed them alphabetically. I would not last 3 hours doing that job. This was the man's entire career. Well, he got tired of that. He wanted to make some money and do something different. So he borrowed $7,000 from his uncle. His rich uncle gave him $7,000, and he bought the rights to a self-watering flower pot. This flower pot had like a little bowl. It was plastic. It had a little bowl, and that's where you put the water. Then it had another little bowl that sat down in that bowl, and that's where you put the plant. Now, the top bowl had a little nipple that came out of it and went down into the bottom bowl, and that's how it pulled the water up. And you had a little bit of a lever on the side for a plant that needed a lot of water. You put it to the far right. For a plant that didn't need much water at all, like a cactus, you put it on the far left, and it drew up different amounts of water on a daily basis. It was actually really brilliant.
Yeah, super smart.
So he got the license to this, and he comes to me, and I was 14 years old, and he says, "Hey, Chris," he says, "how would you like to make some money?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Okay, I'll pay you $1 for every flower pot you sell." I said, "Great, cool. That's awesome. I'll do it." Now, he thought I was going to go door to door and knock on doors and sell 2 or 3 pots to little old ladies. Well, instead, I called up the biggest home center in the greater Seattle Pacific Northwest area. This was before Home Depot. This one maybe had 120 stores, maybe 150 stores in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Alaska, that Pacific Northwest area. So I called up the buyer, and I said, "I'd like to come in and show you a product, a self-watering flower pot." "Great, sounds cool. Come on in." He did not know he was talking to a 14-year-old. My mother took me to, I don't know, Ross Dress for Less or something, and bought me a blue blazer and dropped me off on the street side corner in downtown Seattle and pointed through the door and said, "Go get him, Tiger." So I walked in, and long story short, I demonstrated. I brought a pot, I poured water in it. I took the other thing. I didn't have any dirt in the top one, but I moved the leather and it sucked water up. And he said, "I'm sold."
Sold.
He said, "Here's what I want to buy. How many in a box?" And I said, "Just 24 in a box." He said, "I'll take 4 boxes per store. I want to test it for a year with 20 of my stores, and I'll buy 4 boxes a month." Well, I said it was 24, but let's call it 25 for math. He was buying 100, technically 96, but he was buying 100 per store, 20 stores for a year. So 100 times 20 is 2,000. 2,000 times a year is 24,000. I basically sold like 23,500 pots on the first sale I ever went on in my life.
That is insane.
Oh, what's insane is what happened next. I went back to this guy and I said, "I sold some pots." And he said, "Really? How many did you sell?" And I said, 23,842 or whatever the number was.
Oh my God. I would have paid to be in that room.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. And this is a great life lesson. I tell this story probably as much as I tell anything on these podcast interviews. He got so terrified that he called the company and gave up the rights to his thing. He got his $7,000 back, gave it to his uncle, and gave up the rights to do it because he was so terrified of what that would mean. And the funny thing is it was drop shipping. It wasn't like he had to go rent a big building and store flower pots and all these kinds of things. But, and this is something that I think your listeners need to really ask, is a lot of people, they get afraid of failure. But there's a lot of people that are afraid of success.
Yeah.
They're afraid of what that would mean. They've
Mhm.
been told that getting rich is bad. They've been told that you got to sell out your family in order to build a big business. They've been told all these things. They're more afraid of success than they are of failure, which is why they're failing.
Yeah. Yeah, so true, man. That's something right there. I mean, it's a huge sale, it's a huge win, but it's also a huge, cornerstone of the mindset that really builds up, what we're trying to do on a daily basis.
Yep.
And you're completely right. I think a lot of people are more afraid of success because it implies change, it implies growth, it implies constant motion.
Yep.
And really living outside that comfort zone. And I think, which is, I mean, in my opinion, it's not comfortable at all.
No.
But it's the stuff that we already know, right? It's what we recognize,
Yeah.
and it can be scary to jump into something new, especially if it's on the success and responsibility side.
Yep.
Chris, thank you so much. I mean, it's been a blast having you on.
Thanks for having me.
I have one last question that I like to ask everybody
Yeah.
who I sit down with, and that's, if you were walking down the street and you ran into your 17-year-old self, what would you tell that kid?
I would tell them the same thing that somebody told me once. And that is, be a voice, not an echo. The best piece of advice I ever got from anybody, somebody said, be a voice, not an echo.
Wow. I just got chills.
Really easy to be an echo. And I've tried to find it. It says, and somebody said that Albert Einstein is the author of that quote. I don't know that he is, but that's who tends to get credit for it. Be a voice, not an echo. Anybody can go out there and just regurgitate what somebody else is saying, but we need to develop, we need to think. I have a friend of mine, Mark Sanborn. He always says, the first thing you need to do if you want to be a thought leader is think. And there's a lot of people who want to be thought leaders who don't give a lot of thought to much of it. They read somebody else's book and they twist the words around and then they pass it off as their own.
Yeah, be a voice, not an echo. Man, that's huge. It's deep. Chris, once again, thank you so much. It's been a blast. I'm honored to have you on the show. If somebody wants to reach out, get a hold of you, maybe, I don't know, talk to you about leadership or I mean, just get in touch. Where's the best place to get to?
Yeah, absolutely. Shoot me an email. It's Widenergroup@gmail.com. That comes directly to me, Widenergroup@gmail.com. They can reach out to me on my website. I do executive coaching for people that want to take their life to the next level and beyond. You've already achieved some success. You want to achieve greater success. Those are the people that I help. And you can find me on Amazon or any of those places.
Absolutely, 100%. I'll be sure to drop in the links and the emails below for everybody out there. So, family, Chris Widener with us. I mean, that was a blast. Thank you for being on the show. Stay focused. You got this.